The first thing I remember is not the words themselves, but the sound they made when they hit the air, the way forks froze halfway to mouths, the way Christmas lights shimmered across my sister's face as she pulled her boyfriend closer, smiling like this was all part of the entertainment. She squeezed his arm, turned me into a prop at the end of the table, and with a sweetness she had practiced her entire life said, "This is the failure of our family." My parents laughed, like it was an old joke everyone knew by heart, like humiliating me was just another holiday tradition. I did what I had always done in moments like that. I stayed very still. But he did not. Adrian looked at them, then at me, and in a voice that cut through the room more cleanly than any shout, he said, "Interesting, because she's not the one who's done." That was the moment everything quietly shifted, even if no one yet understood how much. My name is Mara Ellison, and for as long as I can remember, I've lived at the edge of every room in my own home. I grew up learning how to move like furniture, useful, silent, always in the right place, and never in the way. As a kid, I taught myself how to carry plates without clattering them, how to stand in corners where the light didn't quite reach, how to shrink my presence so the people my family actually noticed could spread out comfortably. Most nights, dinner felt like a carefully staged play where everyone else had lines, and I was just the person making sure props were in place. My sister Celeste always sat under the brightest chandelier, her plate filled first and fullest. Mine was whatever was left when the serving dishes came back around cold vegetables, a broken corner of bread, the smallest piece of chicken. When I hesitated, when hunger made me linger a second too long, Evelyn would look up with that gentle, scolding smile and say, "Don't be greedy, Mara." She said it so often it became the rhythm of the house, being careful, being considerate, being less. Gregory barely looked my way unless something needed fixing: a clogged drain, a late bill, a chore Celeste did not feel like doing. He called it building character, said responsibility would make me strong, though somehow Celeste never needed the same character building. She got new clothes, new dance classes, new opportunities that appeared like magic. I got Gregory's tired sighs and lectures about being realistic and grateful. I still remember one winter afternoon when Celeste forgot a school project, some elaborate poster that Evelyn had helped her assemble. When the teacher called, Gregory did not ask Celeste why she left it behind. He turned straight to me. Instead, voice sharpened and ready. "Why didn't you remind your sister?" he demanded, as if my role had always been to live her life, for her to make sure her path stayed clear of every pebble and crack, while mine was expected to be full of them. The older we grew, the more invisible I became. My achievements, small and hard-won, disappeared in the shadow of Celeste's performances. I remember the day I was accepted into an art program downtown, the kind of thing that made my chest feel too tight with hope. I brought the letter home like it was made of glass. Evelyn read it in silence, her nails neat against the paper, then placed it on the counter as if it were a coupon she might or might not use. "Celeste has dance that day," she murmured. "We can't be driving all over town." When I did not immediately nod, she added in that soft, unyielding voice, "Your mother would want you to be practical." Those words were a door, slamming quietly in my face. The letter went into the trash that night. Celeste's new costumes arrived 2 days later, shimmering proof of where the money had gone. Money had a way of vanishing around me. Savings meant for my classes, for my future, for the vague promise of something that belonged only to me, redirected into Celeste's needs with the efficiency of a well-run machine. New shoes, competition fees, weekend trips to places I only saw in passing on social media. I learned not to ask where my portion went. Asking only made Gregory rub his temples and say, "We invest where it matters most," in a tone that pretended he was being wise and objective instead of brutally clear. They never called it favoritism. They called it support. They called it doing what was best. They called it family. And for a long time, I believed them, because believing made the house feel less cruel. Even so, I wasn't entirely blind. I had my own small rebellions, the kind that lived in quiet corners. Late nights in the laundry room, turning the folding table into a makeshift studio, sketching while the washing machines rattled under my elbows. Envelopes hidden behind detergent bottles, holding scraps of allowance, I managed not to lose to emergencies Celeste always seemed to have. In that cramped humming space, I built a world where I did not have to earn a place at the table, where I could fill the whole frame of the picture if I wanted to. But even then, even with all the evidence that I was more ghost than daughter in my own home, a part of me kept hoping that if I worked hard enough, stayed steady enough, quiet enough someday, I would be invited into the warmth they reserved so easily for her. It took me far too long to understand that warmth was never meant for me. The moment I finally understood my place in the Ellison household did not arrive with shouting or scandal or any cinematic revelation. It slipped in quietly the way erasures often do on a day that looked ordinary in a moment so small that anyone else would have missed its weight entirely. I was working late at the agency, the kind of evening where the city outside feels like a distant hum and the fluorescent lights overhead make everything look slightly washed out. I went to the break room to refill my mug, and that was when I heard Celeste's voice drifting through the open doorway, bright and careless, rehearsed, in that way she had perfected since childhood. She was telling one of the new associates, "My sister doesn't have a real career. She just floats around. Adrian only keeps her on because he feels sorry for her." Laughter followed, polite, uncertain, but present. No one questioned her version of me. No one ever did. I stood behind the half-open conference room door, one hand on my laptop bag, breathing through the familiar sting that crawled through my chest. By the time I stepped into view, the conversation had already shifted, as if her little insult had evaporated. But the next morning, the real blow revealed itself. My concept file, the one I had spent weeks refining, was gone from the shared folder. In its place was a new version renamed Polished, just enough to look like it belonged to someone else. And there in the signature line were Celeste's initials, confident and unbothered, like she had earned the right. I stared at the screen for too long, letting the cursor blink at me like it understood something I had refused to acknowledge. Then there was a soft knock. Liam the intern stepped inside with his shoulders curled inward, as though he were apologizing simply for existing. He whispered, "I saw her download your file yesterday. She deleted the original." His eyes flicked toward the hallway as if Celeste herself might materialize from the shadows. I didn't say much. I couldn't. I simply nodded, not at him, but at the pattern, at the cycle that had woven itself through my entire life. I opened the access logs. Her username flashed again and again, download, delete, upload. Clean. Intentional. During the meeting that afternoon, Celeste retold her favorite story of me, the one she had crafted over the years to justify everything she had taken. Mara used to drop out of every activity when we were younger, she laughed lightly. She always crumbles under pressure. People chuckled as if participating in the social ritual of pretending cruelty is harmless. Adrian didn't. His gaze slid toward me, brief but sharp, as though he was reading something in my stillness that the others had always dismissed. I kept my hands folded on the table, my fingers resting on the cool edge, my heartbeat steady, only because I had trained it to be. I did not correct her. I did not ask why she continued to rewrite me. Silence wrapped around me like an old coat, familiar but suffocating. When the meeting ended, Celeste brushed past me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She said softly, "Don't make this weird, okay, as if I were the one who had wronged her." I smiled back, not because I felt calm, but because smiling was the armor I had learned early never show the bruise, only the surface. I did not go home after that. Instead, I walked straight out of the office and into the cold evening, the city lights smearing across the wet pavement like watercolor. My breath fogged the air with each step, and the cold felt almost medicinal. burning away the numbness until everything sharpened into clarity. I kept walking until I reached the co-working space 2 blocks from the agency, the door keypad clicking under my fingers. Inside the room was still just long, white tables, the hum of a forgotten printer, and the faint smell of stale coffee. It was the kind of silence that didn't comfort but steadied. I set my laptop on the table and opened the logs. Every timestamp felt like a small betrayal, each one affirming what I had always known but never confronted. Celeste downloading my concept, the deletion, her upload, the late-night email she sent Adrian claiming she'd fix the flawed direction. I felt nothing, not anger or heartbreak, just the cold clarity of repetition. Then I created a folder and labeled it simply Documents. Into it, I pulled everything that held the truth. Payment discrepancies she had signed without approval. Emails hinting I was overwhelmed, not ready emotionally, inconsistent. Notes where she painted herself as savior and me as a burden. I gathered the things she had hidden, the things she thought no one would trace. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Aunt Rosalind, a photo of old paperwork she found while clearing a drawer. Payments my mother had left for me. Savings meant for my future, the ones that had vanished when I was a teenager. Your mother wanted you to have these, Mara, her message read. I stared at the screen until the blue light stung my eyes. Then I added her files to my folder. At 1 a.m., I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Snow had begun to fall, thin, drifting flakes that tumbled silently under the street lamps. I watched them for a long time, letting the quiet anchor me before turning back to my laptop. I opened a fresh spreadsheet and began listing everything I had ever built at the agency. Clients I brought in, campaigns I directed, projects she had claimed, budgets I balanced, hours I logged. It stretched on longer than I expected, each line a piece of my life that I had allowed others to take credit for. Revenge, I realized, does not always come with heat. Sometimes it comes with precision. The next morning, while the city was still wrapped in a sleepy gray haze, I left the co-working space and walked to the old studio above the laundromat on the edge of Aurora. The place hadn't changed in years. The machines downstairs rumbled like they were shaking the entire building awake, their steady hum rising through the thin floorboards. The air smelled of detergent and warm metal, the scent that had once been the backdrop to my quiet rebellions. I slid open the old storage drawer near the window, and there they were, my drives, the ones I had saved from my early freelance days, wrapped in a wool scarf I barely remembered owning. I plugged them in, listening to the faint whir as the past opened itself to me. Folder after folder filled the screen, familiar sketches, blooming into view concepts and drafts that I had built long before Celeste learned how to mimic my style. These were the seeds of the agency's aesthetic, the colors, the structure, the emotional tone that people praised Celeste for shaping. But they had started here in this tiny room above spinning washers with my tired hands and my late-night determination. I copied only what belonged to me, not out of spite, but because it was mine. By the time I returned to the office, Adrian was already in the conference room staring into his laptop with the weary focus of someone trying to solve a problem bigger than the screen. He glanced up when I entered, and his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if he had been expecting me. "Sit," he said quietly. I did. Without preamble, he turned his screen toward me. "Your file," he said, tapping the corner, the one Celeste claimed. He clicked again, revealing metadata I recognized immediately. "Your name is still in the backbone," he said. She changed the title, not the structure. He watched me closely, measuring the subtle stillness in my expression. When he opened the access logs beside the folder I had compiled the night before, the room thickened with unspoken clarity. You pulled everything he murmured, half statement, half confirmation. I nodded. He studied me for a long moment, then asked, "I didn't push you into this, did I?" There was no judgment in his voice, just the quiet concern of someone who understood what it meant to break years of silence. "No," I told him. The word settled between us like a steady truth. "And you're sure you want me involved?" he asked. I took a breath, thinking about all the times I had swallowed harm to keep the peace, all the moments when I had been expected to endure quietly. "Yes," I said. Together, we began assembling the file. Every piece of evidence, every log, every discrepancy laid out with the tidy precision of people who had done this kind of excavation before, just never on this scale. For 2 hours, we worked without distraction, the hum of the heating vent, the only sound filling the room. Then, as noon brushed against the windows, Adrian slid the final packet toward me. The pages were thick, weighty with truth. "I'll handle the process," he said. "You don't have to be the one to deliver this." But a part of me, a part I had been quiet for too long, wanted to. Not to confront Celeste, not to win some sibling competition, but because I needed to stop witnessing my own erasure and start participating in my own restoration. I placed my hand on the packet, feeling the slight warmth of the paper under my palm. This time I said, "I won't fix what they've broken." The decision settled into my bones with the quiet certainty of a lock clicking shut. When Christmas arrived, I made sure to walk into Gregory and Evelyn's house late. Not by accident, by intention. The entire place glowed with curated warmth, twinkling lights, cinnamon in the air, the controlled symphony of laughter that always felt a little too polished. I slipped off my coat in the entryway, letting meltwater drip onto the tile. They didn't notice me at first. Celeste was holding court near the center of the room, leaning into Adrian as if she owned the space and everyone in it. She was telling relatives embellished versions of her accomplishments, using words like vision and leadership, unaware that her foundation had been swept clean beneath her feet. Adrian wasn't touching her. His hand hovered at her back, then fell away, creating a distance she didn't recognize not yet. When Gregory finally spotted me, he gestured to an empty chair at the far end of the table. "Sit," he muttered. "We've been waiting." As if my absence had disrupted some grand narrative they were trying to stage. Evelyn glanced over her eyes, flicking across my appearance the way she inspected the Christmas ornaments, checking for imperfections. "Try not to make an entrance," she murmured. I didn't respond. I took my seat at the edge, half-shadowed, just as I always had. Dinner resumed tension tucked beneath the cranberry sauce and small talk. Then inevitably, Celeste rose smiling with the kind of practiced sweetness that had fooled this entire family for years. She placed a hand on Adrian's arm, clearly expecting him to support her performance. "I want everyone to meet my sister." She announced brightly, her voice carrying the smugness of someone who had never been held accountable. "This is the failure of our family." The laughter that followed was automatic, rehearsed, reflexive cruelty wrapped in holiday cheer. But this time, the script changed. Adrian didn't laugh. Instead, he set his fork down with a soft, deliberate clink that cut through the room far more effectively than any outburst could have. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, the Christmas music humming faintly in the background like it suddenly didn't belong. He looked at Celeste first, really looked at her, as if he were finally seeing the shape of her actions rather than the performance she wrapped them in. Then his gaze traveled to Gregory, to Evelyn, and last to me, steady and unwavering. In that calm, measured voice that had always signaled something serious, he said, "Interesting, because you're fired." The words landed with devastating simplicity, a truth placed gently yet irrevocably in the center of the table. Celeste blinked her smile, flickering at the edges, as if it were struggling to hold its shape. What she whispered, still half expecting him to laugh, to say it was a joke, to fall back into the rhythm where she was always right, and I was always wrong. But Adrian did not soften. "We're done," he said, effective immediately. A few relatives froze mid-breath, their eyes darting between us as if unsure whether to pretend they hadn't heard. The silence tightened around the room, stretching thin but unbreakable. Then Adrian reached for his tablet, swiping across the screen with calm precision, and connected it to the living room television. The device chimed, and a moment later, the screen washed the room in a cold, bluish glow. "If you're confused," he said, "let's clarify." The first slide appeared the original concept file, the one Celeste had passed off as her own. My name glowed faintly in the metadata at the corner, a small, undeniable fingerprint. He clicked again. The access logs filled the screen rows of timestamps and actions Celeste's username beside every download, every deletion, every upload. The receipts of quiet theft laid out under the soft twinkling of Christmas lights. Celeste stepped back as if the screen were radiating heat. I didn't," she began, voice trembling with a disbelief that came not from innocence, but from shock that she had finally been caught. Adrian didn't look at her. "You did." He answered not with anger, but with the kind of incontrovertible calm that does not allow for argument. The next slide showed payment transfers she had initiated, budgets she had approved without clearance signatures she wasn't authorized to use. Gregory's face stiffened, the edges tightening in ways I had rarely seen. Evelyn pressed a hand to her throat as if physically holding her posture together. Adrian continued, his voice steady and unhurried. "The board received the full report this morning. HR has already processed your termination." Then he clicked one final time. My portfolio appeared not the scattered pieces they assumed I'd been floating between, but the full body of my work campaigns I had directed clients. I had secured the visual language I had built from the ground up. He turned the tablet back toward me, but his words were for the entire room. "Mara," he said softly, "is the co-founder and principal strategist of our agency. She always has been." No applause followed. No dramatic gasp, just a slow, crushing stillness as years of unchallenged narrative cracked open. Celeste stared at the screen like it was rewriting her memories. "You're choosing her over me," she choked out. Adrian finally looked directly at her. "I'm choosing the truth." The sentence was simple, but it carried weight that shifted the air in the room. Gregory tried to speak, but the words tangled at the back of his throat. Evelyn looked down at her folded napkin as if suddenly aware that her curated image was unraveling in front of extended family. No one dared look directly at me, perhaps afraid of what they would see there, someone they had underestimated for too long. I sat still, hands folded loosely in my lap heart, steady in a way that felt unfamiliar, but deeply right. For the first time, my silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like authority. Seattle didn't feel like a fresh start right away. At first, it felt like distant gray mornings, unfamiliar bus routes, the echo of rain tapping against windows that belonged to no version of my past. But there was a quiet mercy in that distance. It let my mind unclench, let my breath loosen. My new apartment was small, with clean walls and soft light, and a single plant I kept near the window. The city outside moved at a gentler rhythm than Aurora in winter. No rehearsed laughter, no curated family image, no roles to perform. Just the steady drizzle of rain against glass, its softness, reminding me I was no longer bracing for impact. Adrian helped me set up the new office not out of obligation, but because he understood the difference between spaces built for survival and spaces built for living. We kept everything simple: wood desk, soft chair sketches, pinned up from campaigns that had always been mine. Work felt different here. Not lighter because it demanded less of me, but lighter because nobody was trying to take it away. For the first time, I created without looking over my shoulder. I didn't cut my family out of my life. I simply stopped orbiting around them, stopped being the gravity holding their stories together. Whatever consequences they faced, audits, questions from relatives, financial scrutiny unfolded with or without my involvement, Silence can be a weapon, but it can also be a boundary. And some people only learn through the absence of the person they took for granted. On Christmas Eve, a year later, I cooked dinner with coworkers who had become quiet constants in my life. We packed extra meals and walked them to the nearby shelter, the cold air crisp enough to sting our cheeks. The kind of cold that wakes you up rather than freezes you in place. When I returned home, I set my own table with care, placing the best portion on my plate, crispy, warm, perfectly chosen. No one told me I didn't deserve it. No one measured my worth against someone else's appetite. The moment was small, almost nothing, but it felt like a life folding into itself, whole, unbent mine. I used to think survival meant staying quiet long enough for someone to finally see me. Now I understand silence differently. It isn't emptiness. It's a door I choose when to open, a room no one enters unless I allow them. If this story found you at a moment when you've been dimming yourself to stay loved, I hope you feel the steadiness of walking toward a life that finally answers back. If it resonated, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who might need it, subscribe for more stories, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from.